To kick things off, Greg, the world has changed so much in the last 2 years, and you kind of chatted about this when giving your introduction. But I would love to hear, from yourself as, the head of growth sales at Adobe, like what has changed, generally speaking, and how teams are deploying, new sales technologies when many, if not all of your team members are now remote?
Right. Well, so there's a lot that's changed. What hasn't changed is the need for people to connect, and especially when you're talking about sales, and especially when you're talking about greenfield or new business sales, when the person you're calling out to doesn't know you and you don't know them. So there's the whole trust factor and deploying technologies, both internally and then externally to the marketplace, like Vidyard has been a catalyst for humanizing things again. And while we can't be there physically, face to face, we still have that need to connect with people, human to human.
Matt, I would be curious, in a similar sort of position to Greg, leading up a sales team, like why video? I mean, you mentioned that you purchased it around 2 years ago. What was the importance there for your team at Pearson?
Yeah, thanks. We sort of embarked on the journey initially. We're always looking for different solutions, innovative solutions to connect with our customers, and really, trying to think from a customer-centric perspective, what is that experience going to look like? So I really appreciate, Greg, your comments on sort of humanizing it or making that connection, different than just reading text that's come through what would be a traditional email. Admittedly, it really came to me from my team. There were team members that were using the free version, and they were showing me some of the benefits and some of the creativity that they were bringing to the platform. And so sort of listening to them, from there, we made a connection with Vidyard, and that's actually where it took off for me, because I got to see it from a customer perspective and how it was being sold to me. So the sales team at Vidyard, sort of not just from an introduction perspective or a prospecting perspective, it was through every single stage of the selling process, whether there was something to follow up on using video. I found it not only easier just to get what I needed from the team to get some of those answers to the questions that I had in the meeting, but also just being able to see a screen and then have the individual at the bottom of the screen just really allowed for that personalized connection, I thought. From a change perspective, when you're looking at incorporating something new like this, obviously we were focusing a lot on the reasons why we wanted to enhance that customer experience. We got a little bit lucky because we started engaging with Vidyard right before 2020. And as soon as we signed and actually started to onboard, it was right about a month after the pandemic had hit and everyone was working in a remote world. So it came at a perfect time when the team was actually motivated to try something new, a different way to engage with those customers who weren't actively available to them in the same way that they were in terms of face-to-face meetings. So I think it actually, in many ways, we had some great onboarding from the team, but my team was just generally motivated to try it because they needed something different than sending out an email and not knowing whether they were getting a response or if it was being read or anything. So, it gave them that opportunity to be creative and try something that was different when we were sort of navigating through a very different time and transitioning over to virtual selling.
When clients are coming to you, or when they're looking to plan a rollout of a new process or technology, what do organizations and leaders need to think about before they even start? And how should they be setting themselves up for success?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, first of all, starting with the why, why are they doing it? And there's been a pretty interesting, compelling event over the last 2 years, which has shone a massive light on sales enablement tech stacks, right? Which is the pandemic. Everyone's got people working from home now. So there's definitely been a good look at that. But then understanding, first of all, what's the problem you're trying to solve? How does that tie to a overall business objective that often has an initiative or an OKR or a number attached to it is very, very important. But the next part's the most critical part, which is how do you take people on that journey to realize the change and understand why the change is happening? So you've got to convince the salesperson that actually this is an effective way of getting across the biggest USP you've got, which is your personality. So sorry, I'm talking for a while, but to sum it up, right, you've got to take the business on a journey. You've got to set the standards, right? This is why we're doing it and what we're trying to achieve out the back of this. You've got to build the enablement around it. You've got to train people how to use video, how to get their message across, make sure they've got the right technology to go and do it. But then you've got to build confidence in the management function and the actual end user of the rep. But this is a really powerful thing, and the statistics back it up. You should really lean into this and start doing it.
I would be curious, and Matt, I'm interested to hear what you've done with your team, with how have you kind of tackled the challenges or the behavioral challenges of what it's like to introduce a video tool to a team?
I'll steal something from a book called Atomic Habits around motivation, but motivation actually happens by doing something. You don't get motivated to do it. You do something and then you get motivated by that action. And what I mean by that in this context is just trying to get your team to take that first step to see if they can have that success with that video. And whether it's successful in terms of the customer actually engaging with it or not, it's just you've hit send. And so you're trying to engage with them in a different way. And that alone can drive some of that motivation, hopefully, to encourage them to continue down that road of continuously engaging with your customers differently. I think the other thing too, in the context of Vidyard and video in general, is it doesn't always have to be that super creative prospecting video of a way to connect with a customer. The last thing I'll also say about it too, Grace, is be empathetic to that as well, to those individuals. You've got a spectrum of team members, at least we certainly do, diversity on our team that represents, some people are very comfortable and eager and wanting to jump in, and some who are very hesitant, if not resistant. So being empathetic to that as leaders and trying to find that motivation and that encouragement for them to give it a shot, and hopefully they'll see the results that you need.
So Greg, I'm curious, what can companies and leaders do to maximize adoption of video tools?
So some of this has been touched on, but the starting point, right, is from a mental and emotional perspective. And so especially with sellers, right? And so it's addressing the why. So what's in it for them? Like why are we doing this? And I agree. It's a journey that you go on. You don't take 100-person sales organization and say, now we're using video to do all these things as part of the sales cycle, the deal progression, et cetera, and expect everybody just to adopt them. You'll have a small percentage that'll be self-serving and do it, but most won't, quite frankly, for a multitude of reasons. So it's first explaining the why and then the how. So I think once you set that foundation, now it's creating a safe environment for everyone to feel comfortable failing, laughing at themselves. And that comes on the practice field, and we already talked about it. But then celebrating the wins, the successes. We do keep score, as we all should be doing in sales. And the ultimate score in sales is the quota achievement. And then underneath that quota achievement, how did video play a factor in accomplishing that score? So
looking at more of kind of like the black and white, I don't want to call it boring stuff, but the policies that you need to put in place with video. Ryan, like, I'm curious, in your role, like what sort of policies or procedures do you recommend putting into place with video software, and how do you typically roll these out?
So I think before you even roll out any policies or procedures, I think you've got to take a look at your sales cycle as a company. And some of our best customers that have adopted this really well have gone, right, we have a 7-process sales cycle. Here's where video should be used. If you look at historically how sales training was, it was a week in a classroom. I was a Xerox rep back in the day. I think we spent 2 weeks in the classroom going through value propositions, understanding why now, why act, that sort of thing. And I think you have to kind of bring that back into play with video as well, is break that video down into sections of, why are you reaching out to someone? What is the call to action and why act now kind of thing?
So I'm curious, Aaron, when looking at adoption and value realization, what sort of best practices can we borrow from just general sales and enablement strategies? Because Brian kind of touched on that, but we're curious to hear your take.
Yeah, I mean, I think Matt, Ryan, and Greg have hit some really good points. And again, obviously, they're thinking about it in terms of their team, which is great. The enablement function thinks about it slightly differently. They're looking at organizationally, right? So different geographies, different teams, different functions, etc. And I think, look, the key thing for any sales enablement function is that the curriculum holds up for what the business is trying to achieve. And my advice now is that if you're deploying video, there should be modules in your curriculum that are around how to use video, why you're using video in the first place, you know, and also the technical stuff of how you set it up and how you integrate it with the other tech stack so the reps are using it effectively, right? So that takes care of the kind of how to. But the key point here, and we spoke about adoption before, is that sometimes we're asking people to adopt video too late, because they've been doing the job for a year and then we're throwing it on them going, great news, we're now doing video. It's like, well, why does your onboarding not have an introduction to video in it, right? So when you're onboarding brand new reps across the globe, you should be talking about the importance of video in your sales process or in your qualification process. And also, again, how to do it, which I think is really, really important. The last point I wanted to make actually was what Matt and Greg both touched on, which is looking for like great examples and then sharing that across the team. What we're always trying to do in enablement is taking those good examples and making them referential for anyone joining the business or in the business, so they can go back and look at it. So if there's examples of great videos, build it into your learning management system, dissect why it was a great video, have some commentary over the top of it, interview the rep who did the video, talk about why they did it and how they did it. And then that information and that data can then be spread across the whole business, so there's a collective reference and learning point for everyone in the business.
As you were mentioning, Aaron, like feedback is so important and sharing that. Ryan, I'm curious with you and with your role, what sort of metrics should people be looking at with video software post-launch to determine, you know, utilization and also like effectiveness of the actual tool?
So if it's to build pipeline, you know, the easy answer to this question is I want to track it in Salesforce or HubSpot against my pipeline. But I think digging into kind of, you know, the way that the world has changed and buyers now, you know, there's 7 decision makers in the average sales cycle now. So, you know, those folks are not in the office anymore. They're probably in a hybrid model. They've probably moved into different regions and areas, so they're not going to come together easily as well. So I think, you know, in terms of tracking usage, every customer is different, because you've got some customers that have long sales cycles, 9, 12, 18 months. And they may only use video 4 or 5 times in that year. But to them, that's helping close that deal faster. It's communicating, it's humanizing the process. And then you've got sales cycles that are, you know, 25, 30 days as an example. So I think you've got to tie it back into your sales cycle and look at that kind of piece and see, am I monthly active users? Am I happy with, you know, this just flowing into my Salesforce pipeline as an example?
The one thing that's really becoming abundantly clear for me is just tracking the distinction between a training video and a selling video. And what I mean by that is, you know, by delivering a lot of ed tech software and a lot of the videos that sometimes we are putting out there is to train the customer and, or in our case, a learner about how to gain access to it or how to, you know, get to a certain function. Those are very important. And there's a really good reason why we could be tracking those and using Vidyard for that. But they belong in a separate bucket. It's comparable to what does it look like when this is a selling call or video, I should say. And then also to some of the comments before, I mean, at what stage of the selling process is it being used? So, you know, when you're analyzing that roadmap of the end-to-end cycle of the customer engagement and where you want video to be, you know, for me, I'd like to see it throughout the entire process, but where are we being most effective? Is it most effective in stage 2, stage 3, or, you know, stage 1 from a prospecting perspective?
Matt and Greg, my question for you is, what is the biggest lesson that you've learned when rolling out a video software?
For us, the biggest learning was the same way we approached, you know, prospecting and cold calling and working it into the very onset of, you know, the enablement, the training of a new hire, the first 90 days. We've taken the same approach with video prospect and video selling. Just you know, it's the same thing. It's helping them overcome that fear, and then first just calling it out and calling it what it is.
I'll say 2 things that I think stand out for me, and one was very similar to Greg, is that hesitancy that we spoke to earlier, Grace. I mean, that's real. It exists. It can be hard to get people to be in front of the camera. And, you know, just trying from an internal team perspective, like not to overthink it. I know the message we often hear from Vidyard when we went through the training and the onboarding is just be authentic and, try to deliver something as quickly as possible. And the more you do it, the better you'll get. You're in many cases delivering a very similar message to every single customer that you're reaching out to, at least if it's a prospecting side of it. So that's sort of the one thing, is not to overthink it in terms of that production. And the other thing for me is just results over time. So, video, and I think this really goes with anything that's new from a selling tool perspective, but not to give up too early as an organization.
And to Ryan and Aaron, for our viewers that are potentially looking to get started, what's your number one recommendation?
Get started. No, that sounds really foolish to say, right? I think that sorry, I hope I didn't interrupt you there, Ryan, but with all these things, right, obviously there needs to be some planning and there needs to be some strategy that's associated with it, and there needs to be an understanding of why you want to do it. But the most compelling understanding of why you want to turn to video is that if you're in an organization that's customer centric, you should be using video, because that's what your customers want, right? Like, we sometimes look inwards at these situations and go, oh, we do things this way, this is our sales process. The customer's never cared about that, right? The customer wants quick, easy, accessible, digestible information that they can look at on their phone. They don't want to be bombarded with emails. They don't want to be bombarded with calls. So that's the first thing, is that just to get started, because that's what your customers want. Now, from an enablement perspective, the enablement function has got to take the business on that journey by building the right collateral, the right curriculum, and obviously coaching and developing the reps to do it properly. But again, you can purchase Vidyard today, I think, and actually get started and get your reps using it. That would be my advice.
To complement Aaron's point of just get on and do it, is I think also it's got to come from top down as well. And we've got to display how we should be doing it, and kind of from that angle.